All right, we're ready.
Thanks. I would now like to call the February 15th, 2023 Longmont Sustainability Advisory Board meeting to order. Could we please start with a roll call?
Sure. Kate Collardson.
Here.
Mary Lynn.
Here.
Michelle Roth.
Here.
Charles Musgrave.
Here.
Robert Davidson.
Hello.
Ralph Grosswald. And Jim Metcalf is out today. He was not feeling well. We have staff member Lisa Knobloch.
Here.
Becky Doyle.
Here.
Francie Jaffe.
Here.
Debbie Seidman.
Here.
Let's see. Heather McIntyre is here, and Danielle Cassidy.
Here.
And Councilmember Martin was not able to join us today either, but we do have a quorum.
Great. So I will read our land acknowledgement statement. We acknowledge that Longmont sits on the traditional territory of the Cheyenne, Arapaho, Ute, and other indigenous peoples. We honor the history and the living and spiritual connection that the First Peoples have with this land. It is our commitment to face the injustices that happened when the land was taken, and to educate our communities, ourselves, and our children to ensure that these injustices do not happen again. Okay. The next item is the approval of the minutes of the last meeting. Does anybody have any changes or corrections that need to be made? Okay. Is there a motion to approve the minutes?
I move that we approve them as drafted.
I'll second that.
All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Okay. And looks like Mary is abstaining.
Yeah, I wasn't here.
Okay, great. All right, then moving on. Are there any, does anybody have any revisions to the agenda?
Nope.
Cool. Okay. Then we will move on to general business. Reminder to the board to please hold your questions and comments until the end of each presentation. After the staff has finished presenting, we'll have time for questions and comments. And with that, Francie, you're up.
Great. Thank you, Chair. Francie Jaffe, Sustainability Coordinator, and I'm going to be walking through both our Sustainability and Climate Action 2022 annual report, as well as highlighting some the key takeaways from our 2021 greenhouse gas inventory. I'll pause after the first one because they almost are like two different presentations. So to do questions at the end of the annual report and then questions at the end of the inventory. So I'm currently sharing a copy of the annual report. And just to provide some context, if you are a newer board member and haven't seen these annual reports before, we combine both the sustainability plan and climate action recommendation report into one biannual report that we provide to both the board and city council twice a year. And this really kind of combines those efforts into one. So this is just our front page. I do want to highlight, we recently just did an ADA assessment. So some of the color contrasts need to be updated. So the final version of the report might have different color schemes just to make it more readable to all members of our communities. Just so in case you see some differences between this and then the final report that will be finalized in the next week. I want to highlight, and I just realized I missed updating it on this version, but the final version, and I believe the one in your package should say indicators.longmontcolorado.gov. We are actually in the process of updating our indicator website. So this is longmontindicators.com is currently live, and you can kind of see progress on indicators. The new webpage, indicators.longmontcolorado.gov, should be launched in the next few months and will be I would say, a more comprehensive action and indicator tracking document for multiple plans. If you can go to it now, it just says under construction. So this page kind of highlights some of our climate action strategies from the climate action recommendation report that don't have, several of them have overlaps with, and it's details that here with area actions in the sustainability plan. So you'll see this call out to climate action throughout the next couple sections. And these are ones that stood more on their own from that report. I'm not going to walk through every single update, but I will kind of call out a couple of them, but feel free at the end if you have any questions on any of the specific updates to ask those. So in this section, just want to highlight that, as you all may know, we used the climate risk and vulnerability map last year to identify that extreme heat was our biggest risk in the city. So this year, using the Boulder County Sustainability Tax to fund 2 initiatives to address that issue. I also want to note you might see some site formatting change, like this spacing here and how those are smushed together. It's more because this is an edited version with some slight updates. Those will be fixed in the final version. So if you had any comments about that type of formatting, we're aware, and that will be updated. In the fall, we had the climate action series that started in 2021 was relaunched in a new format called Climate Action Sundays. The first 2 Sundays focused on air quality as well as watch your waste. The second Sunday included a free drop-in kids activity to try to make it more family friendly, as well as the panels interpreted into Spanish. And our next Climate Action Sunday is actually a week from this Sunday, so February 26th, and will be focused on water. So it's at the Longmont Museum if anyone's interested, and I can send some information to Heather to send to the board as well. Our equitable climate action team, we hired a new staff member to help coordinate that team. So they did a lot of work kind of reevaluating the team structure and how to make it more inclusive and impactful. Last year, they provided feedback on 6 different climate action projects and volunteered at 12 city-sponsored events. At the end of the year, there was a lot of work on recruitment, and actually in the next month or so, we'll be onboarding about 5 to 6 new members and doubling the size of their team. So now we're getting into the section that will go by the 10 different sustainability topic areas. In our annual report, we include both a narrative side as well as an action snapshot. In the mid-year report, it's only the narrative side, as we only have, usually our data is updated on a yearly basis. So just wanted to highlight on the action snapshot side that we did receive a new data point. And since I sent you the document last week for the Longmont Cares program, which is the city's one-stop shop for rebate assistance for income qualified residents, the 2022 application rate was 911. And then just so if there's no date listed, then it's 2022 data, and then we'll add a date if the data is from an earlier year. To highlight some of the programs, our Sustainability Opportunities Lifestyle and Leadership Program, or SOUL, was on hold for a lot of last year, primarily due to lack of staffing. We do have a new staff member who joined in August, so we're really hoping to see an expansion of that program in 2023. Another staffing excitement that kind of impacted one of our programs is that we also had a new economic sustainability coordinator, business sustainability coordinator, who started also in August. So that program, the sustainable business program, was I would say decreased through the first half of the year, and then that program is also revamping. So just wanted to call out kind of those two staffing highlights on the sustainability team that hopefully with both of those programs, we'll see even more engagement in the new year. And this section on the energy side, this update, a lot of the work is being led by Longmont Power and Communications. They are doing a lot of work both on city buildings to try to increase energy efficiency and renewable energy, working to increase building benchmarking. They launched a new portal to help with that effort, as well as recently in 2022 developed an RFP and hired a consultant to create a smart grid roadmap. So that will be in development this year. On the natural environment side, I just wanted to highlight that the volunteer program had a 49% increase in volunteers last year from the previous year. That was most likely both due to kind of getting out of COVID, but also we have in the past couple of years, we had hired a full-time volunteer coordinator to help with Parks Open Space and Trails Volunteers program, which has also helped to kind of really expand and launch that program more extensively. In the transportation, waste, and water section of the report, I wanted to call out that our city fleet services is on track to meet our goal of 25% zero emission vehicles by 2025. Even though we were only at about 5% last year, they're doing a lot of work to stay on track for that goal, including they just received a state Charge Ahead Colorado grant for over $200,000 to install 9 new level 2 and 3 new level 3 charging stations to support all these new electric vehicles we'll have for staff. So those are for internal staff primarily, but that's a really exciting grant that we just really recently heard back from. So wanted to share with you all. As you all know, we will also been ramping up zero waste efforts with the passing of the zero waste resolution last year. Our business sustainability coordinator also worked with Boulder County PACE to launch a to-go-where program to support businesses in adopting zero waste policies. So that also occurred last year, as well as other efforts besides the zero waste resolution to try to increase that waste diversion. And then in the water section, a new program that I wanted to highlight was the city staff started participating in Resource Central's long replacement program. It was a huge success. So they're doubling the budget for next year. So really trying to expand that program that can really reduce outdoor water usage. And then our last page on this report is a highlight of just the sustainability program in general. I would want to call out, and we're probably going to add a star right here, that we received an A on the International CDP Global Environmental Disclosure System for 2022. It's our second year reporting and first year receiving the score of an A. And then in terms of education and engagement, we were present at 18 community events and presentations, as well as had 3,200 unique newsletter opens. And I actually have a question on this data point for you all that I'll ask in just a second. But in this section, we have a sustainability evaluation system tool. In total, we've had 26 city projects. So this is a very internal facing tool. Go through that effort, and we're currently working to revamp the tool and hope to expand the use of it more extensively, and we'll probably be talking to you more about that tool throughout the year. And then in terms of, and I'll zoom in on this so you can definitely see it. In terms of our actual strategies, 91% of our immediate, near-term, and ongoing sustainability and climate action recommendations are on track. Starting next year, we'll actually get into the midterm timeframe. So you may see it, so that percentage might adjust and change as we move into more strategies that we're planning to get started in 2023. And then in terms of targets, 69% have either been met or on track, or relevant strategies have not been implemented yet. So some of those ones I was talking about that weren't supposed to get going until this year or later. So before I open it up for your questions, I actually had a question for the Sustainability Advisory Board. This is a new data point that we're presenting. Last year we did it increases in people signing up for the newsletter. We thought people opening the newsletter would be more impactful than people just signing up for it, but realized that just saying 3,000 doesn't give you a lot of context. So we could present it this way, or we could say 40% of newsletters were opened. We could detail that we had 11 newsletters go out last year. So curious to you all what you think might be, because our newsletter is a big point of how we engage the community, and we do have a lot of people signed up for it. Would saying 40% open rate would be better, or if they're just curious on your thoughts. I'm going to stop sharing so I can see everyone.
Yeah, Charles.
I like both, actually. I think 40% sounds good, because that's a pretty high fraction of the number of people who receive it. But without the context of the total number, if it's like 10 people signed up and 4 of them opened it, that wouldn't be great. So having both of those numbers, I think, reported provides both the size of the impact and the level of engagement, basically.
Thank you. That makes sense.
Yeah, I think 40% is a pretty good number on open rate. That's something to be proud of. I was most intrigued by the number of newsletters that went out in the year when you gave the list. That's just kind of a personal. I thought that would be that's an interesting number for folks. But 11 is not as high as 3,278 or whatever that was. Other thoughts? Yeah, what you got, Ro?
Are we opening up for other places, or just still talking about the newsletter data?
I think the question, the open question right now is that what's the best statistic to highlight there in that section?
Nothing to add on that. I had another question.
Fair enough. Yep.
Yeah, I think the 40% is great. And I mean, I guess, yeah, both numbers give context too. But yeah, just doing newsletters before you get so excited about sending them out, and then the open rate is like 10 and 20%, and you're like, oh, that's so 40 means people are very interested.
Do you have by chance like an average, I don't know, across the city newsletter open rate or something like that? Is there something you could compare it to? That might be interesting. We
have a MailChimp number because they give you like of newsletters of similar, and it would so like a government MailChimp number, and they said 28%. So we could also do that kind of comparison. Though I was trying to figure out in the small space we have how to have like MailChimp says this, so that we could maybe do a footnote for if you all think that comparison could be helpful.
I think that's an interesting, like to put a little star and or whatever footnote that says that the normal open rate for this type of newsletter is 28%. It's pretty good.
Thank you. That's helpful. We'll bring it back to our team and kind of adjust that. Thank you. So, yeah, if there's no questions, I guess next.
Awesome. I think Ralph had a question.
Yeah, I noticed when I was reading through this earlier today, actually you were just on this where the 91% number is and the 69% number is. But I thought that the 69% number was a little misleading since 18%, I don't have my notes in front of me, but some percentage like that has not even been implemented. And I wondered why that was lumped in. There might be a good reason for that. But I thought, well, these are implemented and these are in work. And then also included in the 69% were, you know, action steps that nothing's been done on. And I wondered why it was included in that number. Maybe there's a reason for that, but just wanted to see what your thoughts were, Francie.
Yeah, no, I'm happy to answer that question. We were almost worried that if we had just said the 4% plus the 47%, so it'd be 51% of our targets on track, that would almost be underselling some of the work because it would there's that almost 20% that it's neither not on track. It's not, it would almost seem like it implied that there is that large percentage that's not on track yet, when it is a longer term goal. So that's why we were worried that it would almost kind of seem like there was a large portion that we're not on track at all, when some of that portion is just because those strategies haven't been implemented, so that's why we kind of included it in the large number, but then had that narrative to kind of explain the breakout to show both a little bit.
Okay. And if you guys were focused on it and talked about it, then I'm sure you were thoughtful about it. It still seems a little bit misleading. The way wording were changed to something that, included, but say that something along the lines, I don't have it in front of me, so I don't remember the exact wording, but are you able to put that back up? I don't want to take a lot of time for this, but if we took a quick look, well, they could say, are part of our long-term strategy. Just to say they've not been implemented just seems deceptive a little bit to me. It struck me when I read it. I don't know if there's another way to word that are part of our long-term strategy or under, or in the planning stages or something that is, it almost contradicts what the number's there for. Because, you've included things that you've done, and things that you've not done, all in one number. Anyway, something to think about. I don't want to take much of the group's time, but I noticed that when I read through it today.
Thank you, that's helpful. And you all, as you make direct comments on this, I'm just gonna do comments in the section so I don't miss any of your comments, so you'll just see me typing. But yeah, I think that is something we can look at more extensively, and then also could do something similar to this one above, of targets of strategy that have been implemented. This is the percentage that are on track or have been met, and then a separate note, just 18% target or longer term targets or something, and just kind of separate it a little bit. So thank you.
Yeah, that's good feedback. Other thoughts, questions? Charles?
Yeah, I think it was on page 7 under transportation. You mentioned something about expanding the city's fleet of zero emission vehicles. And then it says including purchasing or something 34 hybrid vehicles for the police. Something like that. There it is.
Yeah, and as you say that, I realize how that is a little bit, the zero emission is a bit misleading with the inclusion of hybrids.
Yes, exactly. Hybrids are not zero emission vehicles.
And my understanding with our fleet services is that we are still working to look at electric vehicles as well as our renewable and natural gas trucks to help meet that goal. But
Yeah, on the next page where it has the target, it also says,
it does include hybrids. So let me talk to our fleet services staff just to clarify whether that goal, and that may be my misunderstanding on the goal itself, that our goal is to have 25% be vehicles that fall in electric, hybrid, or renewable natural gas, or whether it's just electric or renewable natural gas. So I can check in with, and I don't know if Lisa has a better understanding of that, but I can check in and report back to the board separately to clarify
sure.
what the goal is, and then also what's meeting the goal.
Yeah, that'd be great. I know we've mentioned this a few times in the past, but places, any place where we say that, hybrid is a zero emission vehicle, that's just false. And so we need to correct those. And then one other thing is earlier it was mentioned about, I think it was extreme heat was determined to be the largest risk, climate risk to Longmont. I think that's
Of the 5 vulnerabilities that we modeled. So we did not model all climate vulnerabilities.
right. So this is probably something that wouldn't go into the report itself, but just one of the biggest challenges with extreme heat in urban areas is building density. And so over the last several years, the city has been improving higher and higher density development. And that seems to contradict the risk of extreme heat. We've had cases in the past, studies examining, for example, extreme heat in places like Chicago, where a heat wave comes through and 700, 800 people die during the heat wave because of the extreme heat. And the biggest issue, that basically complicates that is that in high density areas, the heat dissipation, heat capture, all that is really low. And so I'm not sure, at some point it'd be interesting maybe in the future for us to see if city council is thinking about taking things like urban density into account, extreme heat risk into account when they approve development plans for higher density housing and things like that.
Yeah, that's not something that I have the knowledge to answer. With that, it's something I think we could revisit in the future. One of the projects we are doing is a heat mapping as to kind of better understand extreme heat. So that could also demonstrate what areas of the community might be actually harder than other areas of the community. And then at that time of looking at community driven cooling solutions, that could be something that could be explored at that time, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and what ends up happening, what they find is that in these higher urban density areas that are more vulnerable to extreme heat, they also tend to be places where there are lower income areas, and so there's an equity issue that happens sometimes. So
yeah,
anyway,
if you're able to share those studies with us, that would be greatly appreciated.
yeah, I'll go back and find it. And then one last thing is there something weird going on with the typesetting or something in the report?
Yes,
Because
yeah, that will be fixed. That because we're in a close to final draft, I was making some edits to the report to send back to our consultant who designs it. And in doing that, it just threw off some of the typefacing. So I apologize, it kind of squished some of the words together.
No problem. Just making sure you notice them too.
Yeah. Thank you, Charles.
Mary, I see your hand raised.
Yes, thank you. I have several points. First is there's no such thing as a zero emission vehicle, and I think that's an unnecessary virtue signaling pat on the back. It shouldn't be in the report. They should be called electric vehicles because they are not zero emission. It is not even clearly known what the cost to recycle the batteries is, and certainly the creation of the cars is not at all zero emission. So I would like to have that changed to electric vehicles. And the extreme heat, I agree with Charles. If we look at traditionally energy efficient, sustainable, cities throughout history, thermal mass needs to have a shade element. Otherwise, the thermal mass of a large multi-conjoined building with conjoined dwellings just retains the heat, and it causes a lot of excess use of air conditioning and such, which, as Charles has mentioned, if it is a largely lower income population, that is not only wasteful in terms of energy, but difficult to pay for. Yes, the city of Longmont, the last time I looked at the development log, had many thousands of conjoined dwelling apartments and townhouses being approved in a massive crush, apparently, to use up all of the possibly annexable and buildable land around the outskirts of the city. And why are we doing this? Why does Longmont have to be, when the state of Colorado is experiencing zero growth, why does Longmont have to be putting in so many dwellings and putting them in a way that's going to cause a burden on our grid at a time when we have an unknown future because we're demanding electrification when we don't have the resources to fulfill that demand?
So I would recommend, in terms of the on both yours and Ralph's comments on the kind of the development plan, I would recommend that the board request to staff that we have a separate discussion on that. That is not my expertise. I don't work in planning. So that would be my recommendation, as I'm not able to really speak to those items at this time.
How about accurately naming the vehicles electric vehicles, since they are by no means zero emission?
Can I hop in on that? The goal is alternative fuels, is what I am reading, and so maybe that would be a good alternative word choice.
And I'd like to add, it's not just electric vehicles. We also have our renewable natural gas vehicles that also help meet that goal. So yes, we can definitely look at changing from zero emission vehicles, because it, like you mentioned, we aren't thinking about the full life cycle impact of vehicles, and look at that alternative fuel language as a substitute.
So I like your suggestion, Francie, that we bring in the development staff. I'm very concerned about Longmont's transportation-oriented development focus, and many aspects of that which do not seem at all sustainable to me. And I would very much like to ask the planning staff, why we're bringing in an RTD that loses $250 million a year to a town that has a fifth of the density that's required to make light rail fiscally responsible. And, the pressures that I'm already seeing on the actually more sustainable neighborhoods like Old Town, where people live in houses with good thermal mass. We have a horsehair stucco walls with large trees, and where we don't even have to cool our house in the summer. And there's already a pressure to put in these big high thermal mass buildings because there's potentially this money sucking RTD coming in. None of this seems sustainable to me, and I would very much like to talk to our development, our planning and development team about these issues.
I've made a note to discuss that during our items for the board section of the agenda. So we'll circle
Thank
back
you.
to that at that time. Thank you. Other thoughts, questions on this part of the presentation? If not, then I think there's more. Okay, yes.
Very fast. I was just going to say thanks. I know it takes a lot of work to organize all this data and put it together. And I like the commitment to hold ourselves accountable, to update and share with the public how we're doing on this stuff. That shouldn't get lost in any of the advice and suggestions we have here. And I just want to say thanks.
Thanks, Robert. That absolutely. Really appreciate all the work here. Ralph, I see your hand raised.
Yeah, just I had the same thought. I wanted to thank Francie and all the people. It's an incredible amount of work. And while we're nitpicking about small things, which are important, I don't mean to belittle them. We don't want to overlook the incredible document that these people have put together. Thank you.
100%. Thanks. Thanks for making that top of mind, everybody. So Francie, are you giving the next part of the presentation?
I am, so I'm just gonna
Right.
stop share so I can pull up the right portion, and then, yeah, thank you for your thanks for this report, and we also really appreciate highlighting where language needs to be clearer. There's that confusion that as it is a large report, so sometimes we miss things, so thank you. And now I am going to bring up a summary of our 2021 greenhouse gas inventory. Before I bring that up, I do want to just kind of give a little bit of a background. So our baseline for our greenhouse gas inventory is 2016. We are scheduled to do an update every 3 years. So it would have been 2022, but we decided to do an update a year earlier because Boulder County was actually doing a countywide inventory. As part of their countywide inventory, they're essentially doing a close to full Longmont inventory to do that. So we decided to partner with them and their consultant. And then we hired the consultant to add the Weld County portion so that we could get a full Longmont inventory. So that's why it's a year earlier than we would normally do an inventory update. And this inventory does follow the GPC protocol for greenhouse gas emissions. We do add some informational items. So in this first inventory, we do have an informational item that this first slide that I'm going to highlight. So let me bring that up. So let me know if you can't see that, but this is a breakdown of our greenhouse gas inventory by sector. This section down here called the additional equity share emissions is an informational item that we calculate to go along with our inventory. It's essentially the Longmont's ownership of what Platte River Power Authority sells to other communities. Because they're selling the energy to other communities and it's being used in other communities, those communities would include that in their inventory. But because Longmont is a co-owner of Platte River Power Authority, we think it's important to, as an information item, show that portion. So that's just why it has a patterned background instead of the solid background. And then just to highlight, similar to other inventories, electricity and natural gas. So this portion in here from buildings has been the largest percentage of our greenhouse gas emissions, though we're down from about 80% to 70%. And those percentages are not including this additional equity share. So we are seeing decreases in our building emissions, and my next slide will show that a little bit more. After that, we have transportation. I've split up on-road transportation and then I separated out aviation. This transboundary aviation that makes up most of that aviation category is Longmont's proportion of emissions from the Denver airport. That's very outside of our ability to control. So we do separate on-road transportation to highlight this is the area that Longmont can have more control on those emissions versus the Denver airport. And then after that, our next largest section is solid waste and wastewater. And then there's these very small sections that are about like less than 1%. That's where our agriculture and as well as our industrial processes and procedures categories are. So here's our year-to-year comparison, and I pulled out those three main categories. So for total stationary energy, so buildings primarily, you can see that we have seen a decrease since 2016. This is due to efforts to make our grid transition closer to 100% renewable energy, as well as efforts to make our buildings more energy efficient. And then in 2021, we were still seeing some of those impacts of COVID and different habits. We are currently working with the consultant to do a final summary memo that will really detail some of the reasons why there are changes. So I know a little bit about it, but they're going to do a much deeper dive into that summary memo that we'll share with the board once that's ready. In terms of transportation, you can see this kind of 2016 was high and then lower than 2019 and then upper in 2021. There has been some activity data changes, but this is primarily due to changes in methodology. We're always trying to improve how we calculate our greenhouse gas inventory. And one of those big changes to methodology is how we've actually calculated our portion from the Denver airport. So in 2016, we think it was an overestimate. In 2019, we think it was an underestimate. And then in 2021, we think we've worked with a consultant to develop a better way of estimating that impact. So I would say that's the main reason for this up and down. But if we actually look at the on-road transportation emissions since 2016, we've actually had I think it's about a 2% decrease. And then waste, which is overall small, and then you do see an increase here in 2021. That small increase is due to two primary reasons. One, we've had great data on what the city collects, and we collect residential services. In a couple of years ago, they launched the Recollect service, Boulder County, ReTrack, Recollect something else, ReTrack service, Boulder County, and a waste tracking service where they've started to request that commercial haulers add data. So every year we start to have more and more commercial haulers report their data. So part of this increase is because we also think we have more commercial haulers reporting what they're hauling in 2021 versus previous years. Another reason there's an increase is that there was an update to the global warming potentials. So essentially that comparison of greenhouse gas emissions to create our carbon dioxide equivalent number that can kind of combine them all. And for methane specifically, the impact of methane actually increased. So they realized that methane had a greater impact. So when you're converting it to carbon dioxide equivalent, it's actually a larger conversion. So part of this increase comes from us realizing that the methane generated in our landfills and through some of those processes is having a larger impact than we might have thought in earlier years. But overall, we've seen about a 13% decrease from 2016. Some of that is due to some of these methodology changes and improvements, but there is decreases due to actual activity data in terms of transportation and buildings, but especially that continuing effort to transition to 100% renewable energy on our grid. So this is kind of our projection document looking into the future. You see we have a big drop right before 2030, and that's due to when coal plants are planned to be closed at this time to work towards these goals of 66% by 2030, and then 69% by 2050. So even though we're at 2021, only 13%, we do expect as we get closer and closer to 100% renewable energy that we'll get closer to this goal. And then I just want to highlight that when these goals were set, we did not have this section here from building electrification. Currently with building electrification modeling, we do think we'll actually get above our 2050 goal. So that's it for the greenhouse gas update.
Great. Thank you so much, Francie. Any questions? Michelle?
Thanks, Francie. That was super informative. I was just wondering, because you did mention DIA, but do we also take into account, I'm right off of Airport Road here, our airport as well?
Yes, we do. So in that, aviation is a total of 5.69%, and then 0.1% of that is from our airport specifically. So we do factor in it. It's just a much smaller proportion than DIA.
Thank you.
Ralph?
Francie, could you explain how Weld County is included and how far into Weld County these numbers are included in our report?
So it's the city of Longmont boundary. So it is the portion of city of Longmont that is in Weld County. I believe, need to pull up the report. I believe about 95% of Longmont's in Boulder County, and then about 5% is in Weld County. Although we do our commercial, we have I think 4 commercial buildings in Weld County, and then a number of residential buildings. So that's primarily where that impact would occur. And those commercial buildings are actually larger manufacturing buildings, so they, I would say, have a larger impact than like your average commercial building, but 4 in terms of like all commercial buildings, that kind of gives you about a scale. It's not, most of our emissions come from the Boulder County portion of Longmont.
Thank you.
Other thoughts? Questions? Okay.
And I forgot to mention that we will also share the Boulder County-wide inventory that's not yet published and available. And they're also working on a consumption-based inventory, which I think will also speak to kind of Mary Lynn's questions on full life cycles of vehicles and that type of thing. So once both of those reports are available, we will share those with the board from the county-wide overall level.
Great. Well, thank you, Francie, for the presentation and for all of the work that you've done putting all of this together. You and the team have done incredible work. So thanks. Okay. It is now time for public invited to be heard. Each person wishing to speak will be unmuted to speak one at a time. When it is your turn to speak, please state your name and address for the record. You will have 3 minutes for comment. I will time you, and please, when I indicate, please do wrap up your remarks. So, who do we have?
Thanks, Kate. We have 3, and our first up is Kim Edmondson.
Hello.
We can hear you.
Okay, I'm Kim Edmondson on Bittersweet Lane in Longmont. I hope that many of you took the time to watch some of the EMF summit that I had forwarded through Heather. As you know, I'm greatly concerned about this invisible hazard. Being a mom to 8-year-old twins, I do worry a great deal about their health and the health of the planet going forward, just like the rest of you on this board. Where I differ is in solutions. I still see no point of upgrading electrical meters to ones emitting nonstop EMF pulses 24/7 that cannot be turned off. As I see it, the only purpose they serve is to the city to make more money by overcharging its citizens to help pay for your smart infrastructure dream. According to an article I came across on the Colorado Communities for Climate Action website that Lisa Knobloch, I'm sure, is quite familiar with since she sits on their board of directors, the Biden Inflation Reduction Act is investing $369 billion over 10 years to combat climate change. $73 billion is for grid modernization. Well, who's paying for all this? Well, we are, all of us, and my kids will be too. Also, according to the Colorado Communities for Climate Action, they break down what Colorado gets and where it's going. I saw $0 set aside for grid modernization, $3.7 billion for roads, $225 million for bridge repairs, $916 million for public transport, $57 million for EV charging stations, $100 million for statewide broadband, and $432 million for infrastructure development for airports. Aren't airplanes a big, huge carbon generator? Why are we putting $432 million into airports? Also, did everyone forget that CO2 is also kind of important in photosynthesis? The plants use it to produce oxygen. Maybe we should plant more trees. Surely Lisa understands this, having been part of the Denver Urban Garden Organization. I know your heart is in the right place, but how can you claim to be doing all this in the name of equity when in the end you cannot afford your rent and utilities? How are these policies fair to the lower income people in our community? I guess if you want equal outcome versus equal opportunity, then we need to go full Stalinist Marxist to get there. And it seems to me most of our city leaders and board members are ideologically on board with exactly that. There's a recent Denver Gazette article, Colorado new environmental rules could cost building owners and tenants more than $3 billion. This is courtesy of House Bill 21-1286. This was a bill about electrification, switching away from natural gas for heating and cooking, which requires more large buildings like apartment and complexes to update their systems. Building owners will pass on these expenses of these upgrades to renters. They almost always do, like every time they up the property taxes. All of this for which an existing grid can support this does not exist. We don't even have the grid. You still need to hire a person to advise us on our grid. We're going forward with all this stuff and we don't even have the grid to support it. What are we doing? Are we on crack? It makes no sense to me, so much of what you're doing. And I wonder how many of you are even aware of what happened in Ohio recently on the 4th of February
Okay,
with the train crash. Is that my time?
that is your time. Yep. Thank you.
Next up, we have Ethan Augreen.
Hey, I'm sorry, I wasn't aware that I was going to be speaking, but I'm happy to share a few words. I agree with the last commenter, and I also think that planting trees should be more of a priority. There's a great website called treeequityscore.org where you can compare the tree canopy and equity scores of different communities. Compared to Boulder, Longmont is at a deficit of about 11 equity points. And there are neighborhoods that score very poorly on that chart, especially the east side of Longmont where I live. Planting 30,000 trees, according to this website, would sequester over 300 tons of carbon per year. So it could be a really great solution for air pollution. And yeah, I think we need to be thinking more strategically about climate issues and not just go along with what big green organizations are pushing, because a lot of that in a larger analysis is not really sustainable in the long term. So that website again is treeequityscore.org. And I'm curious how many trees Longmont planted last year. Does anybody know?
Thank you.
Is there an answer? Does anybody know how many trees were planted in Longmont last year by the city?
I am, I do not have that number, and Heather, can you help me?
I
on-
do think that's in the report that Francie just went through. Let me see if I can pull that back up and grab it.
Thank you.
In the meantime, do you want to go on to Doe Kelly?
That would be great.
All right.
Can you hear me?
We can.
Okay. Well, good afternoon. My name is Doe Kelly and I live on Barberry Drive. We appear to keep putting the cart before the horse, and like the first speaker, she said similar things. This is something I've thought about for a very long time when considering the rush to 100% renewable energy by 2030, using smart meters as the #1 priority in Longmont, knowing there are damaging effects of electromagnetic radiation on life forms, and when pondering the wisdom of rushing into generally unproven and more than likely unsafe wireless infrastructure. The FCC still has not gotten back to us to provide us with updated radio frequency guidelines based in the 11,000 pages of submitted recent science on non-ionizing radiation harms and their mechanisms, as ordered by the court in August of 21 in the Children's Health Defense versus FCC lawsuit. I know that I and other public speakers have brought this to your attention before. One can no longer presume that the wireless frequencies being foisted on us are safe, as our own FCC, now acknowledged as a captured agency, has failed to protect the public. On a related issue, and as Kim Edmondson was saying before, I came across an article in the Denver Gazette a couple of days ago entitled the same, Colorado's new environmental rule could cost building owners and tenants more than $3 billion. And it outlines the problems of rushing to electrification through a proposed rule under the recently passed environmental legislation. And I quote the CEO of Confluence Companies, Tim Walsh, from this article. So we're pushing for electrification before we even have a solution in place on how we're going to produce the power or distribute it to the buildings. I think that's the biggest issue that nobody wants to talk about or tackle. It's the cart leading the horse or the egg before the chicken, end quote. And just as I mentioned in the beginning, the cart is yet again before the horse. It is unbelievable to me, but in a very good way, how much pushback there is, legal and otherwise, in our own nation and elsewhere against powers that be, thinking they can foist dangerous, unsafe technologies and not well thought out changes on we the people, especially when we have little say in the decision making. For example, Massachusetts just became the latest state to introduce smart meter legislation with a bill that would require the state's utility companies to obtain written consent from consumers before installing a smart meter. The bill would also eliminate fees for consumers who want to opt out of smart meters. People in New York, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, and other states and cities are questioning and pushing back against overreach by governments, telecoms, and utilities. Lawsuits are being pursued, and at times our side, which is pro-life on Earth and for the precautionary principle, and which also favors updated independent science, prevails. We need this type of thinking and action. We need it in Colorado and in Longmont, and we need it now.
Thank you.
I'll send the article to the board via Heather. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay.
That's our last one.
Great. Thanks so much. The next item on the agenda is items from staff. And it looks like this is the Button Rock Management Plan letter of support. So Danielle, turn it over to you.
Hi. Yes, I don't want to take up too much time in your agenda because I know you have a packed one. I presented at Parks and Recreation Advisory Board on Monday, so day before yesterday, and have been kind of looking to incorporate some of their feedback in the draft document that I'm trying to get ready for council by March 14th, as well as a presentation that I gave at PRAB, that I will give at Water Board at the end of the month, and that I'll be giving to council. So I provided that to you too. In all fairness, I wanted you to be able to see not only the executive summary of the draft document itself, but also that presentation, because it's, you know, it's the written word in the document, but then the presentation is kind of the visual aspect of things. So it's a lot. It's a lot to take in, and then not a lot of time. The other thing I wanted to say is that the hope is to go out to the public and have a link to the document in its final format by March 1st. So that's in the works right now. So, you know, it's out to PRAB, or Parks and Rec Advisory Board. It's out to you. Next, it'll go out to Water Board, and then the general public will have 2 weeks with the document before City Council. So I apologize for the format. You just got the content, but the format is coming. It's not going to be as pretty as Francie's report, but it'll look much better than it does. So I'm here in case you have, you know, because I'm asking for your support for the plan before I go to City Council. I'd like to take the feedback from all the boards and let council, you know, what the feedback is. So I'd like to make sure, answer questions and discuss in the time that we have here today.
Great, thank you. The floor is open to the board for questions and comments. Mary, I see your hand.
Yeah. I read the plan with interest. I did look at some of the references in terms of the issues with dogs being on the trail and their potential disruption to habitat and water quality. And I'm very sympathetic to this concern. I didn't think that the cited references were very strong. I would like to see them more specifically, you know, in North America, in Colorado, in relationship to specifically water reservoirs. And I also felt like if it's so hard to sort of confront the issue of people wanting to recreate with their dogs in one of the most beautiful places that I've ever been to. But I think the question needs to be asked in a more pointed fashion. Are we threatening our water sustainability by allowing dogs at the reservoir in the way that we do? I think it has to be asked in a more pointed way. And if I was a staff member, I would cringe at having anyone say this to me. But I think that if it's asked in the right way, people will realize that they simply can't engage in behavior that may possibly threaten our sustainability and our ability to provide water for ourselves. I hope that's useful in input.
That is useful. Do you want a response, or should I just listen?
I would love to hear a response. Tell us how we can help you. I guess I'm saying if you brought us a strongly worded letter that was based on stronger research, I wouldn't mind.
So just in response to the citations that are highlighted around dogs and that were used, it's somewhat of an emerging field, dog impact on wildlife. So going out and finding citations from other countries was necessary. The citation that we referenced in the, of course, in the document, but also in the presentation length, that is a local survey, and you'll see it in every other local data and survey that is done around here around this topic, because it's the local data that we have. So I used what is available. What we do know, let me see.
I guess I was
Saying ask
suggesting
the-
that doing a survey where the question is asked more directly and maybe only a few questions, an additional survey is what I'm suggesting.
Oh, you're talking about another public survey?
Yeah, I know that you've done a bunch, but I was looking at it and thinking, I wish there was a public survey saying, if there's a chance that having dogs at Button Rock is going to bespoil our water, the reserves in the reservoir, do you still think we should be allowed the dogs all the way up the trail? Yes, no, something like that.
I did ask that question.
Okay.
And I don't have my surveys in front of me. But I can pile through it and find how I worded that question, but I did say, knowing that this is, your source water, drinking water, knowing that this, is your preserve and there's native wildlife and habitat, knowing all these things, do you still think that, dogs should be allowed at Button Rock, something like that in one of the surveys? So it was asked in a pointed way it must have been survey 3 because survey 4 was all about code recommendations.
Okay. So I would just highlight that in your report is all I'm suggesting.
So highlight the question. I mean, yes, and so one thing that came up at PRAB is there were a couple of people that were really digging in on this same issue, the prohibition of the recommendation to prohibit dogs at Button Rock Preserve, and digging in and saying, well, if the public, if the majority of the public in these surveys is saying they don't like it, why aren't you listening to the public? And what I'm hoping that you're seeing, and tell me if you're not, is that surveying the public is one part of looking at the visitor use plan, but the whole comprehensive plan is looking at the botany, zoology, hydrology, all of it, and taking all of those things together. And I tightened some things up and buttoned some things up with language after PRAB because they didn't feel that I was getting that message across. Thank you. I appreciate. I think the comments are helpful, and I'll take any comments you have, and that's why I'm here. Ralph? Oh, sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
I had a question. I'm just curious, is the issue compliance where the humans are not following the rules and picking up waste, or is there still an impact even if people were doing what they were supposed to be doing?
Part of the issue is compliance. Part of the issue is that we know from the empirical data that there is an immediate impact of having dogs in our protected preserve in terms of the dog waste that is left behind, the dog waste that may be getting into the source water, the dogs and their chase instinct, and the effects of wildlife travel corridors and stress on wildlife, physical temporal stress that can cause them to change behavior. We know from the empirical data that birds never habituate to dogs. So it's just that we purchased the preserve over time in the 1960s, completed Button Rock Dam with a bond. And during that time, we said, we will have the preserve open to the public for residents to enjoy. And then in the 1990s, over time, we started adding more public use, types of public use, rock climbing, and then dogs, and then fishing. And so over time, more uses have come into the preserve. And now we're seeing over time, visitor use is really starting to increase. And so what can managers do to find a balance? We're not saying, let's take away public recreation at Button Rock. We're not saying that. We're saying, what can we do with this increased visitor numbers, knowing that the preserve is our source watershed, knowing that other source watersheds, don't even let people recreate in them. What can we do here to find a balance? We still want people to enjoy it. That's something that the city has promised. Management zones is one important piece of this plan that the staff is recommending, as well as prohibiting dogs, because we know of the immediate impact of dogs. It will help lessen some of the impacts. And, if in the 1990s we were slowly letting in types of recreation and now we have huge amounts of visitors, maybe it's time to look at slowly, you know, figuring out what has the most impact and doing something about that. So management zones get at the critical areas that need to be protected, but the areas where people can recreate and areas where we can plan for future trails, and prohibiting dogs gets at some of that same balance as well.
Thank you.
Yeah, Robert.
Yeah, so obviously the dog prohibition is a hot button issue for a lot of folks. What other alternatives have we considered? Like, if the impact of the animals is partially the poor human behavior around them, is there a fee structure that's been looked at to help provide resources to? I don't know what the answer is. Obviously, I don't think I have an answer. I think it'd be wonderful to know what other alternatives were considered and why they weren't recommended.
Well, I guess I'll let you know that. Oh, sorry, Mary, you.
Well, I was just going to say a fee structure was recommended. That did seem interesting to me as a possible option.
That's correct. We did
Yes.
survey the public about, you know, what are your feelings about charging a fee, an entrance fee, and then looking at different tiers of entrance fees. So that data was collected. It's not something that we're recommending at this time, but in this baseline report, we did collect that. But what I also wanted to say is that before this plan was started, staff came to Water Board and City Council in 2018, and long before a plan was started or decided upon, submitted a recommendation to, you know, leash all dogs at Button Rock because there was a problem. There was a problem then, and the recommendation was not taken by council at the time. And then in 2019, staff began this plan because, you know, the plan tells us what it is that we're protecting. You know, staff came to council in 2018 and said, look, there's a problem and we know we have this preserve and we know that we have this water. And the question is, but what is really there? So now staff has gone through this process to figure out what is really there. And now we know about the biodiversity that is there, and the wildlife that is there. So, you know, staff is much more confident in a prohibition of dogs with the data behind it, than going to council and saying, look, dogs are a problem, we know it. We're seeing it. There's compliance problems and there's waste problems, and it's just it's anecdotal as opposed to this comprehensive plan that puts more behind it.
Yeah, Mary, one more question here, and then we're gonna have to move on. We're short on time, but please.
So as I was reading the report, Danielle, the question occurred to me, can you restrict the proximity of the dogs to the reservoir? So for example, maybe put in a partial loop trail so that dogs can only go so far up, so folks can enjoy that nice long kind of pleasant incline on the way up and down, but without having the problems that we're having with them being so close to the water.
No, it is something that staff considered, but the preserve is only going to get more visited, you know, and the problem is only going to increase. And knowing that the science is behind this, this is our recommendation. We did consider, you know, something like that, because, you know, dogs are an emotional issue and people love hiking with their dogs. And, you know, this is the place in the foothills where people have gone for 30 years and things like that. But the fact is that, you know, this plan is helping managers understand the impacts and what what we can do now, given the present day circumstances, to best care for and protect our preserve resources.
Well, as I said, I love dogs and I so love like petting other people's dogs out in the trail and such, but I want to protect our water. So I would endorse a strongly worded letter of asking for support of your proposed plan.
Okay, and now I did put together a letter of support template for you and a memo. And just before we close out, because I know we're getting long here, but in the memo, I cited some visitor use numbers, and I have since realized that the 2022 numbers are flawed. So yeah, if you dig into the monthly data, there are 4 to 5 months that are either didn't read data or only took 6 days of data or whatever. So the 2022 numbers are not usable. And I included them in your memo. So I would like to submit a corrected memo to you. Yes, and I didn't mention specific issues in the letter of support. So I don't know. That's it. That's all I have.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, so the action here is for us to either support this, endorse this letter of support, or not. And let's see, does anyone want to make a motion on that? Or yeah, and just to clarify, sorry, Danielle, that this will be presented before we meet again. So there's no there's no, I don't know, circling back on this as a group.
That's correct. There isn't circling back. We have been working on the plan since March 2019. And in that time, boards have changed. And, so there aren't too many board members who have gotten to be a part of every piece and interim update that we have come and given to the boards. But what I would like to do is take the comments that I heard from Ralph and Robert and Mary and incorporate those in, my council communication. So I'm saying, these are the things that I heard from Parks and Rec Advisory Board, and this is how they voted. This is what I heard from Sustainability and how they voted, and then same with Water Board, so that those comments are included in the public record.
Great, thank you. I think I'm among the few who have been here for a lot of this, and one thing that has been really striking to me is the amount of feces that staff has to pick up, that just on the trail, and it is bags and bags and bags every day. if I remember correctly, it's really atrocious.
Yeah, and just as quickly, that's from our former watershed ranger. Since this plan in 2020, he left the city, and we now have 2 full-time watershed rangers, 2 different watershed rangers, and they are extremely busy with resource protection and forest stewardship and everything else, and kind of one outcome of this plan during this plan is that we were able to hire more staff at Button Rock because we were able to highlight the need. They do not spend their time anymore picking up that waste. If it's bagged and it's on the side of the trail and it's something, and they're doing it and they've been there for a long time, then they'll pick it up. But it's not a number 1 action item. They have so many other things that they're doing. So that's just a piece of information.
Thanks for that. Mary.
I was under the impression that we had closed discussion. We're moving to motions. Is that correct? We are being a bit informal.
That is my bad there. Thank you.
That's okay. So I would move that we approve the letter as it stands for endorsement for presentation to City Council. And now we're supposed to have another discussion section, I guess, which we just had. If we have a second.
I'll second that motion.
Okay, any other thoughts, comments on this? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Are you all, any opposed? So it looks like the motion carries. And thank you, Danielle,
Thank you.
for the presentation and all your work on this.
Thank you for your time. And your support.
Absolutely. Okay. The next item on the agenda is items from the board. Oh, wait, nope, Lisa, sorry, gonna skip right over you there.
No problem. This actually doesn't, I don't have much on this regard. I just wanted to mention a couple of things that are going to be coming your way, because I think some of them are attached to some of the comments tonight. So we are working right now on a sustainability communications plan. So we have a consultant that we've hired and have some folks from our communications team that are helping to work on developing a broader communications plan for all things sustainability. So we'll be bringing that to you all in a couple months when that's completed. And then also the indicators dashboard that I think Francie mentioned earlier. So this is more of just a little bit of a sneak preview of some things to come. So Francie mentioned that we had the indicator, longmontindicators.com, that's going to be changing over to a new platform, but it's going to take a couple months for us to do that. So just a couple of words of update, and I will pass it back to you to move on with your agenda.
Great, thank you. Okay, now we've made it to items from the board. And as a reminder, we've decided that this is the time where we will address any comments that we heard during public invited to be heard. If anyone has anything to say, I am curious if we got an answer to the question about how many trees were planted. I did not see that, but my search skills may have been lacking.
And I would like to remind that several of us brought up questions of our planning philosophy and strategy of putting in the high density, high heat buildings in Longmont versus planting trees and using shade to mitigate heat effects.
Okay, so just to clarify, that is the request to have somebody from the development department give a presentation?
From planning, yes.
Okay.
Well, to justify this approach, justify this high density conjoined building approach versus having another one of many other approaches.
Okay, understood. That is all. Sorry, I did not say that, but that is also on my list. But while we're on the section of public invited to be heard, the question was asked during that time if we know how many trees were planted in the city by the city last year. And because Francie has turned on her video, I think she might have an answer.
Yes, there were 236 trees planted. I also want to, and then we also sold 176 Arbor Day trees. We've ordered more trees to sell more trees through Arbor Day. I also wanted to give a little bit of a caveat on the number of trees planted. You'll actually see this as a footnote in the annual report, but we've been finding from our forestry staff has been finding that the effects of a hotter, drier climate and the presence of the invasive insect emerald ash borer are causing established trees to decline and die, making it more difficult to establish newly planted trees. So I just want to, and then they also saw that there was an impact on the supply of trees due to COVID, and it does take a couple of years to grow trees to increase that supply. So I just wanted to share those as additional footnotes to the number of trees planted last year.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Mary?
I just want to take an exception to the comment, a quote unquote hotter, drier climate, since we simply don't have enough data to know whether or not what we're experiencing is something that's temporary of a few years or decades of length. And this exaggerative climate emergency language is not helping us in terms of our ability to communicate with all sectors of our community.
Okay. Thanks for that note. Are there other thoughts? Questions, comments? Ralph?
Just a quick question. We were having a presentation by Daryl, I think it is, on smart meters, AMI, next month. And I submitted about 10 questions actually on that and spent several hours researching. I wanted to thank the people who spoke today for the links that they gave us. I'm trying to get educated to this, but I wanted to understand from what he said, the decision has already been made to install these. There are apparently over 500 that are already installed. And you know, I'm really starting to certainly have some issues that I would like to have addressed, right, and trying to understand the impact this can be from a health perspective. I've been to the American Cancer Society website and a number of other sites trying to get educated to this. And I just wondered if the decision has already been made to move forward. What is our role in this? Because I want to know whether or not I've already spent about 2.5 hours trying to get educated on this. And if it's a done deal and everybody goes home and hopes for the best, then I won't spend any more time on it.
Yes, I'm gonna ask if Lisa, can you help answer that question?
Yeah, I can. I don't want to speak for Daryl, but he and I have definitely been in conversation about this for exactly that reason. My understanding in talking to Daryl is yes, the decisions have been made and the city is moving forward. There's already 580 or so meters that have been installed. He's coming in March to help answer the questions as far as what the city's decision-making process has been and what's been shared with city council from the different standpoints that you all and the concerns of the public invited to be heard have been shared, so that you all are informed about the city's decision-making process. My understanding is that by and large, that decision has been made and the city's moving forward.
Okay, thanks. That confirms what I was understanding as well. Mary, I see your hand.
It's just due diligence to note that the science has absolutely not been settled about the safety of the smart meters. There are grave concerns about privacy issues, and lawsuits are mounting. And I would like to caution the city to wait and to see what happens with some of these legal actions are in the works. I think that moving ahead with the smart meters at this time is fiscally reckless, and I want to have my comments on the record.
Heard. I'm also unsure what we can do as a board, other than we can listen to comments, and it sounds like this is something that is happening without our input, and I'm you know, we will hear again from more people on this issue. But to Ralph's point, there's to spend a lot of time on this, when we don't have the power to do anything about it, is not, it doesn't feel productive.
Kate, we have a moral responsibility to speak up when we see a concern, regardless of where the city is in its decision-making process.
And absolutely, and citizens have the ability and power to do exactly that. Ralph.
Kate, is it possible to, I think some of the points that have been raised about liabilities, I've seen in my reading, there's 57 counties in California that have forbade installing these. There's certainly, and again, I want to be clear that I'm trying to keep an open mind and get educated. But I've certainly read enough to have some concerns, and it's very complicated to do research on this because of the variety of influences, a person's, own health and sensitivities, how much they're exposing themselves to their cell phones and various other things. It's clear that RF is dangerous, but the question is the addition of these. And there's also the issue of, is the city, and this is one of the questions that I asked, in addition to these meters for electricity, has there been any discussion about gas and water? Because in other communities, they're looking at that, which could triple the amount in our community. So question that I have is, and again, I'm a newbie, this is my first year on the board, so I apologize for my ignorance, whether there's a staff or city person who could attend our meeting and give us what avenues there are if we were to come to the conclusion, or if anyone were, are there any avenues the board could take if we should come to the conclusion that this warrants further consideration? If there's nothing we can do, it's not productive, you're absolutely right. Let's move on to other things we can have an impact on. But if there is something that we can do to at least, certainly the question that I've asked, been trying to understand what research they reviewed in making their decision, what economic and other, impacts they study, so I could have a little more of an understanding how the actual decision was made. But if we were, as a board, I have to agree with Mary that if we were, as a board, were to see that they have not carefully at least reviewed and come to opinions on this, then I wondered if there's either a legal opinion from the city attorney, or I don't know the infrastructure of our city to know what resources there would be, whether or not there's any thing that can be done in the event that some of us feel this needs further investigation.
To underscore Ralph's point, you beat me to it, Ralph. I'd like to speak to our city attorney about this. I'd like our city attorney to attend our meeting.
I can ask that a city attorney be present. I do want to be mindful of their time. Anybody can always, similarly to city council, can send a notice or comments to the city attorneys as well. I can check in with them. I can't make a promise that they're going to be able to be present at the meeting. I do want to speak to the point that this has been underway for several years at this point, and there has been several conversations with city council. So I am listening to you all, and I do want to be mindful of people's time given where we're at in this process. I can potentially ask the city attorney, a city attorney, we have several, potentially to provide you with any information rather than attend our meeting that they've also given to city council pertaining to some of the issues that have been brought up. To Ralph's point, I just want to say you all are always welcome as a board. If you want to vote on this issue, pardon me, you can always submit a letter or a memo to city council stating the board's collective position on this issue, and then it would be up to city council as to whether or not they want to revisit anything. So I know Councilmember Martin isn't here today to speak to that, but that would really be, from my understanding anyway, your only course of action would be to say, as a board, this is what we think, and then it would be in city council's hands to either do something with it or continue to move forward.
I would like to, thank you, Lisa. I would like to recommend that we compile a list of our questions and concerns, particularly the ones that are pointedly of a legal nature, and that we have a discussion about this in a future meeting, and that we then decide whether or not we want to draft a letter of recommendation.
I do want to say that you all have been given the last month to compile questions, and today was the deadline for people to compile questions so that LPC staff has sufficient time between now and our next meeting to answer those questions.
Yeah, Ralph.
I did take time to send it. As I mentioned, I had 10 questions that I'm sure Daryl wasn't happy to see, but I only got his response yesterday that I didn't realize how far down the road this process had gone. And so that certainly impacted my thinking. And Lisa, I think you had a good suggestion. We may not be able to impose on the city attorney, although this is a pretty important issue. I mean, if there's going to be liability to the city, that was one of the questions that I asked in my questions, that maybe at the very least, we could, as Mary suggested, for points that are specific to our powers primarily. In other words, what avenues there are, maybe we could put some thoughts together on approaching the city attorney to simply get an opinion on, if he says ball game over, let's don't waste our time. But if he says these steps A, B, or C could be taken by this board at this stage, it could be at least helpful to us to know and evaluate as a board whether or not it makes sense to proceed down any of those avenues. I haven't given you a path forward. These are just some rambling thoughts about it, but I just feel it's important enough to have an understanding somehow of where we're at in this process. I mean, I think we have a responsibility to look at this and at least make sure that others have looked at this. If others who have more expertise than we do have looked at this and have thoroughly looked at all of this research and the legal implications and the health implications, then we move on. But if not, we wouldn't want to have left on the table that we didn't at least explore our options. That's just my thoughts.
I just want to clarify, Lisa, I was recommending that we come up with questions for the city attorney, not for LPC staff, which is a different project than, or deadline than we were given last time.
I will check in with LPC. I believe those things would go to LPC. They would have worked with the city attorneys during this process. Like I said, this has been underway for a couple of years. So let me check in with them and I will let you know if there's additional time for legal questions. I know Ralph said he brought up some of those questions already to Daryl.
Well, I'm not comfortable with LPC's legal opinions on these things, though, frankly. I would like to speak
They
to.
would not be LPC's legal opinions. LPC would have been working with the city attorney's office in this manner.
Well, it would be useful to be able to speak to our legal counsel about these legal matters.
And Lisa, just a quick question. My concern is not just the variety of legal issues and liabilities for the city, which I did address, but what can be done at this stage? And I don't know, you may have direct access to just be able to ask. I'm just curious so that we don't waste more of our time, whether or not there's anything that can be done that's sort of separate from the legal issues about doing this in relation to the community. But is that something you could at least get an opinion on? If they say that, at this point, when the council has taken this position, you can only do A, B, or C. Is there a way you could get that information for our board?
Yeah, I can check in with Daryl about that.
That'd be great. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you. Lisa, while you're on camera, do we have room in a future agenda to have somebody from planning and development come?
Yeah, what I would do probably is I have some tentative time scheduled for us to go over the climate risk and vulnerability map, which is the area that talks about extreme heat. It doesn't go into the issues that you all have brought up tonight, but I think that would be a good meeting to incorporate that into the conversation. So I'd be happy to do that.
Great, thank you. Okay, any additional thoughts from folks we haven't heard from on this? Okay. So thank you, Lisa, for running back and getting answers to our questions. Really appreciate that. And we'll look forward to learning more next month. So with that, we have reached the end of the agenda, and just a note to that there were additional informational items that were attached to your board packet. Just a note to review those. And with that, we're at the end. Is there a motion to adjourn?
I'll move that we adjourn.
Second.
All in favor? Okay. Thanks, everybody. I really appreciate your time, and
Okay.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.
see you next month.
Thank you.
All right.